The old art studio on the fourth floor of Ravencrest Academy smelled of turpentine and forgotten dreams. Celeste wiped her paint-stained fingers on her worn apron, stepping back to examine the canvas before her. The portrait was taking shape, a girl with hollow eyes staring out from shadows, much like herself. She'd been here since dinner ended 3 hours ago, long after the other students had retreated to their dormitories or gathered in the common rooms. This was her sanctuary, the place where she could breathe without feeling the weight of whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the place where her scholarship status didn't matter. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Celeste froze. Students weren't supposed to be in the art wing after 10 o'clock, and she certainly wasn't supposed to be here without supervision. She quickly began cleaning her brushes, preparing to hide her work and slip out through the back stairwell, but the footsteps stopped right outside her door. "Don't stop on my account," came a voice she recognized immediately, smooth, confident, with just a hint of amusement. Damien Blackwood stood in the doorway, his dark hair slightly disheveled, his usual perfect uniform loosened at the collar. Celeste's heart hammered against her ribs. Damien Blackwood was Ravencrest royalty heir to the Blackwood fortune, captain of the debate team, and everything she was not. She'd watched him from afar in classes, had seen the way other students gravitated toward him like moths to flame, but they'd never actually spoken. "I should go," she whispered, not meeting his eyes as she continued packing her supplies with trembling hands. "You're painting," he said, moving closer. "It's incredible." Despite herself, Celeste glanced up. Damien was studying her canvas with genuine interest, his green eyes reflecting the soft light from the desk lamp. There was something different about him here, away from the crowd of admirers that usually surrounded him. He seemed smaller somehow, more human. "It's nothing special," she murmured, but made no move to cover the canvas. "It's you, isn't it?" he asked quietly. "The girl in the painting." The question hung between them like a challenge. Celeste had never intended for anyone to see this piece. It was too raw, too honest. The girl in the painting was everything she felt, but could never say. Isolated, yearning, trapped between two worlds. "Why are you here?" she asked instead of answering. Finally meeting his gaze, Damien ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. The tower has the best view of the city, and it's quiet. I didn't expect to find someone else who appreciated the solitude." There was something in his voice that made Celeste pause. For a moment, the golden boy facade slipped, and she glimpsed something vulnerable underneath. Perhaps Damien Blackwood, with all his privilege and popularity, knew something about feeling trapped too. "I won't tell anyone you were here," she said softly. "And I won't tell anyone about your after-hours masterpiece," he replied with a small smile that seemed more genuine than any expression she'd seen him wear in public. As Celeste gathered her things and prepared to leave, Damien called out softly, "Celeste, that is your name, right?" She nodded, surprised he knew it. "Same time tomorrow?" The question was casual, but something in his eyes made it feel like an invitation to something far more significant than late-night art sessions. Celeste felt the familiar flutter of possibility mixed with the sharp sting of reality. Boys like Damien didn't really notice girls like her, not beyond momentary curiosity. But as she walked back to her dormitory, through the empty corridors, she couldn't shake the memory of how he'd looked at her painting and at her, as if he truly saw something worth seeing. Damien had always excelled at maintaining facades. In the marble halls of Ravencrest Academy, he was the perfect son his father expected, charming, ambitious, destined to inherit the Blackwood Empire. But as he climbed the narrow stairs to the old art tower for the third night in a row, he felt those carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Celeste was already there, standing before a new canvas. This time she was painting the view from the tower window, the city lights bleeding into the dark sky like watercolors in rain. She didn't look up when he entered, but her shoulders relaxed in a way that told him she'd been waiting. "You came back," she said simply, adding a stroke of amber to capture a distant streetlight. "So did you?" They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the past few nights. Damien would arrive around 10:30, after his mandatory study group with the other legacy students. Celeste would already be painting, lost in her own world. They would talk quietly as she worked about art, about books, about everything. Except the obvious gulf between their circumstances, tonight felt different. Celeste set down her brush and turned to face him fully for the first time since that first evening. "Why do you really come here, Damien?" she asked. "And don't say it's for the view." He found himself studying her face in the dim light. Celeste had the kind of beauty that revealed itself slowly, delicate features that grew more compelling the longer you looked, dark eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations. She was nothing like the polished girls who usually surrounded him, girls who were beautiful in obvious, expected ways. "Because when I'm here with you, I remember who I am beneath all the expectations," he said, the honesty surprising even himself. "My father has my entire life mapped out. Blackwood Enterprises, the right marriage to the right family, the right political connections. But when I watch you paint, when we talk about books and dreams and impossible things, I remember I used to want to write." Celeste's expression softened. "Write what?" "Stories, novels. I used to fill notebooks with them when I was younger, before my father decided creative pursuits were frivolous." Damien moved closer to the window, looking out at the city that would one day be part of his domain. "What about? You? What do you dream about when you're not painting?" "Freedom," she answered without hesitation. "I dream about having my own studio someday, maybe in Paris or New York. Somewhere I can paint what I want, sell to people who understand art isn't just decoration for rich people's walls." She paused, then added quietly, "I dream about not having to be grateful all the time." "Grateful? For the scholarship, for this opportunity, for being allowed to exist in your world temporarily." There was no bitterness in her voice, just exhaustion. "Do you know what it's like to walk into every room knowing you don't belong? To have professors introduce you as our scholarship recipient, like you're a charity case on display?" Damien felt something twist in his chest. He'd never considered how isolating that must feel, had never thought about the weight Celeste carried simply by existing in spaces where she wasn't fully welcome. "You belong here more than most of us," he said quietly. "You're here because of talent, not inheritance." Celeste laughed, but it wasn't entirely happy. Talent doesn't pay tuition fees. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken understanding settling between them. Then Celeste picked up her brush again, but instead of returning to her canvas, she approached Damien. "Give me your hand," she said, not confused but trusting. Damien extended his hand, palm up. Celeste dipped her brush in blue paint and began painting. On his skin, not random marks, but deliberate strokes that formed words across his palm and fingers. "What does it say?" he asked, watching her concentrate. "The story you don't write is the one you'll regret most," she murmured, finishing the last letter on his pinky finger. "My art teacher told me that when I was afraid to apply here." Damien stared at the painted words on his hand, feeling something fundamental shift inside him. Without thinking, he reached out and tucked a strand of Celeste's hair behind her ear, his paint-stained fingers lingering against her cheek. "Celeste," he whispered, and she looked up at him with those dark, honest eyes. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Damien was dimly aware that crossing this line would change everything, that there would be no going back to safe conversations about art and literature. But as Celeste's lips parted slightly and her gaze dropped to his mouth, Damien realized he was tired of safety, tired of living the story someone else had written for him. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the other might disappear. But when Celeste's arms wound around his neck and she pressed closer, Damien deepened the kiss, tasting hope and rebellion, and something that felt remarkably like coming home. The Autumn Gala was Ravencrest Academy's most prestigious event, where wealthy parents and alumni gathered to celebrate another year of excellence and write generous checks. Celeste had volunteered to help with setup, grateful for the excuse. To avoid the awkwardness of not having a formal dress or date, she was arranging white roses in the Academy's greenhouse when she heard footsteps on the gravel path outside. Through the glass walls, she could see Damien approaching, but he looked different. Gone was his usual confident stride. Instead, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying a heavy weight. "You look beautiful," he said as he entered. And Celeste glanced down at her simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned. "I'm not going to the gala," she said, turning back to the flowers. "I'm just helping with preparations." Neither am I. Surprised, Celeste looked up. Damien was supposed to be the guest of honor. His father was the evening's keynote speaker, and the Blackwood family had donated the funds for the new science wing. My father and I had a disagreement, Damien said, loosening his bow tie. About my future, about expectations, about the difference between living and existing. He moved closer, and Celeste could see the storm in his green eyes. What did you tell him? That I'm tired of being a character in someone else's story. Damien's voice was quiet, but firm. That maybe I want to write my own ending. The greenhouse felt smaller suddenly, intimate in the way that spaces do when they hold important conversations. Outside, they could hear the distant sounds of the gala beginning orchestra music, laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. Celeste, Damien sighed, reaching for her hands. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your passion for art, your courage in pursuing your dreams despite everything, you've changed something in me. She felt her heart racing, but fear crept in alongside hope. Damien, we come from different worlds. After graduation, you'll go back to your life, and I'll go back to mine. This is just what? He interrupted, stepping closer. Just the most real thing I've ever felt? Just the first time I've met someone who sees me as more than a trust fund with a last name? Through the greenhouse windows, they could see couples dancing in the grand ballroom, elegant and distant as figures in a painting. But here, surrounded by the scent of roses and earth, everything felt possible. Dance with me, Damien said suddenly. There's no music. Then we'll make our own. He pulled her into his arms, and they swayed together in the dim light filtering through the glass. Celeste could feel the warmth of his body against hers, could hear his heartbeat beneath her cheek. For a moment, she let herself believe that fairy tales could come true for scholarship girls who painted their dreams in empty towers. I've been thinking about what you painted on my hand, Damien murmured against her hair. About the stories we don't write. And I don't want to look back and wonder what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose you. Celeste pulled back to look at him, searching his face for any hint of uncertainty. But Damien's eyes were steady, full of a determination she'd never seen before. Choose me, she whispered. Choose us, he corrected. Choose this feeling, this connection, whatever it is we're building together. The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket. Celeste had spent her life being chosen for scholarships, for opportunities, for charity. But Damien was asking her to choose, to be an active participant in writing their story. The gala will end soon, she said, though she made no move to step away from his arms. Then we have until dawn, Damien replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her back. When he kissed her this time, it was different from their first kiss in the tower. This kiss was deeper, more urgent, full of all the words they hadn't said, and all the possibilities stretching before them. Celeste felt herself melting into him, her careful walls crumbling under the intensity of feeling something so real. They sank onto the soft blanket she'd spread on the greenhouse floor for the flower arrangements, and Damien's hands tangled in her dark hair as she pressed closer to him. The sounds of the gala faded into background noise, replaced by whispered confessions and gentle touches that spoke of longing held too long in check. Are you sure? Damien asked, his voice rough with emotion. Celeste looked up at him, this beautiful, complicated boy who saw her as more than her circumstances, who made her feel like she deserved to be chosen, and nodded. I've never been more sure of anything, she whispered. In the soft light of the greenhouse, surrounded by the scent of roses and possibility, they gave themselves to each other completely. It was tender and overwhelming and perfect in its imperfection. Two people from different worlds finding common ground in the space between heartbeats. Later, as they lay tangled together, listening to the last guests leave the gala, Celeste traced patterns on Damien's chest and tried to memorize every detail of this moment, because tomorrow would bring reality back, with all its complications and impossibilities. But tonight, in their glass sanctuary, they were just two people who had found something worth fighting for. 3 days had passed since the night in the yacht greenhouse, and Celeste felt like she was living in two different worlds. During the day, she attended classes, ate meals in the cafeteria, and maintained the careful invisibility that had protected her for so long. But at night, her skin still remembered Damien's touch, and her heart carried the weight of secrets too precious to share. Damien had been different, too distant in public, as if their night together had never happened. When their eyes met across the dining hall or in the corridors, there was a flicker of something intense, but he made no move to approach her. Celeste told herself this was for the best, that returning to their separate lives was the only logical choice. But logic did nothing to ease the ache in her chest. After a particularly grueling rehearsal for the Winter Art Showcase, Celeste dragged herself back to Worthington Hall, the scholarship dormitory that housed students like her. The building was older than the main campus, with creaky pipes and temperamental heating. But it was home. She gathered her toiletries and headed for the communal bathroom, looking forward to a hot shower to wash away the day's tensions. Steam was already rising from behind one of the shower stalls, but Celeste paid it no mind. Privacy was a luxury none of them could afford here. She'd just stepped under the warm spray when she heard a familiar voice, muffled by the sound of running water and the fog that had begun to fill the space. Celeste, her heart stopped. Through the steam and frosted glass, she could make out a figure in the stall across from hers. Damien's silhouette was unmistakable, but what was he doing here? Boys weren't allowed in the girls' dormitory, let alone in the bathroom. Damien? She whispered, barely audible over the water. What are you doing here? If someone sees you, I had to talk to you. His voice carried through the mist, urgent and strained. I couldn't wait anymore. Celeste's hands shook as she reached for her towel, wrapping it around herself. The steam was so thick now that she could barely see her own hands, but she could sense Damien's presence like a physical weight in the small space. We can't do this here, she said, but she made no move to leave. I told my father about you. The words hit her like cold water. Celeste felt her knees go weak, and she pressed her back against the tiled wall for support. You did what? Last night, after dinner. He was going on about the Pemberton girl again, about how perfect she'd be for the Blackwood name. And I just ... I couldn't pretend anymore. Damien's voice was rough, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. I told him about you, about us, about how I feel. Celeste's mind raced. She could imagine the scene Damien facing his formidable father, the man who controlled his entire future, and choosing to tell the truth about his feelings for a scholarship student. The courage it must have taken, the consequences he must have known would follow. What did he say? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. That I was throwing away everything he'd worked to build. That I was being manipulated by someone who could never understand our world. That if I didn't end this immediately, he'd make sure you lost your scholarship and never attended another prestigious school. Celeste closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of her precarious position settle back on her shoulders. She'd known this moment would come, had tried to prepare herself for it. But hearing the threats spoken aloud made them feel devastatingly real. So that's it then, she said quietly. It's over. No. Damien's voice was fierce, cutting through the steam between them. Celeste, listen to me. I'm leaving Ravencrest. What? I'm withdrawing from the academy. I've already spoken to the headmaster. My father can't control me if I'm not dependent on him, if I'm not living the life he's mapped out for me. Celeste felt the world tilt around her. Damien, you can't. Your education, your future. My future is what I make it, he interrupted. I've been accepted to the University of Edinburgh, their creative writing program. I applied months ago, before I even met you, but I never had the courage to accept. Now I do. Through the fog, she could see him move closer to the glass that separated them. His hand pressed against the surface, and she found herself mirroring the gesture, their palms separated by mere inches of frosted barrier. Come with me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Celeste, I know it's crazy. I know it's asking everything of you, but I can't imagine writing my story without you in it. Damien, she breathed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. I can't just leave. My scholarship, my dreams of finishing here. You're talented enough to get into any art school in the world. Edinburgh has an incredible fine arts program. We could both start fresh, both choose our own paths instead of the ones chosen for us. Celeste pressed her forehead against the glass, feeling the cool surface against her heated skin. The practical part of her mind was screaming warnings. This was reckless, impossible, the kind of romantic gesture that only worked in movies. But another part of her, the part that had been buried under years of being grateful and cautious and small, was singing with possibility. When? She asked, and knew that the single word had changed everything. Tomorrow night. There's a train to New York, then a flight to Scotland. I have everything arranged. Tomorrow? Celeste's voice cracked. Damien, that's not enough time. I need to think. I need to. If you need to think, then you already know the answer, he said gently. Celeste, I love you. I love your passion, your strength, your refusal to let this place dim your light. I love the way you see the world, the way you make me want to be braver than I am. The words hung in the steamy air between them, precious and terrifying. Celeste had never heard them before, not directed at her, not spoken with such conviction. And truth. I love you too, she whispered, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff. But love doesn't always mean we can be together. Sometimes it means making the hard choice, the responsible choice. And sometimes, Damien replied, his voice strong despite the emotion in it, love means being brave enough to choose happiness over safety. The steam was beginning to clear, and Celeste could see Damien's face more clearly now, the determination in his green eyes, the way he was looking at her like she was worth appending his entire world for. I'll be at the train station tomorrow at 11, he said. Platform 7. If you're not there, I'll understand. But Celeste ... please don't let fear make this choice for you. With that, he was gone, leaving Celeste alone in the dissipating steam, her heart pounding and her mind spinning with impossible possibilities. Celeste didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow dormitory bed, staring at the ceiling and watching the hours tick by on her alarm clock. 3:47 a.m., 4:23 a.m., 5:51 a.m. With each passing minute, Damien's offer felt both more impossible and more necessary. By dawn, she'd made 17 different decisions and changed her mind 18 times. Her roommate, June, found her sitting on the floor surrounded by art supplies and half-packed bags when the morning light began filtering through their small window. Rough night? June asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Celeste looked up at her friend, another scholarship student, who understood the weight of being here on borrowed opportunities. June, what would you do if someone offered you everything you'd ever dreamed of, but accepting it meant giving up everything you'd worked for? June sat down beside her, picking up one of Celeste's brushes and twirling it thoughtfully. Is this about that boy? The one you've been sneaking around with? Celeste's cheeks flushed. She thought she'd been more careful. How did you? You've been painting differently, June said with a small smile. Happier, more alive. And you've been coming back to the room at strange hours, with paint in your hair and stars in your eyes. There was no point in denying it. He wants me to leave with him tonight to Scotland. And you're scared, terrified, Celeste admitted. What if I'm throwing away my future for a boy? What if this doesn't work out? What if I'm being naive and stupid? And what if you're not? June interrupted gently. Celeste, you're the most talented artist I've ever known. You could succeed anywhere. But I've never seen you as happy as you've been these past few weeks. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching dust motes dance in the morning sunlight. Then June stood and pulled Celeste to her feet. Come on, she said. Let's go for a walk. They made their way to the old art tower, climbing the stairs Celeste had traversed so many times over the past month. But instead of entering the studio, June led her up one more flight to the rooftop. From here, they could see the entire academy spread below them. The grand buildings where the legacy students attended classes, the newer dormitories where wealth was assumed rather than earned, and beyond it all, the city that stretched toward the horizon. Look, June said, pointing toward the skyline. You can see everything from up here. All the possibilities, all the paths you could take. Celeste followed, her gaze taking in the vast expanse of world beyond Ravencrest's walls. For so long, she'd focused only on surviving here, on proving she belonged, that she'd forgotten there was an entire world of choices waiting for her. But if you always choose the safe path, June continued, You'll never know what else was possible. By evening, Celeste had made her decision 3 more times. Her bags were packed, then unpacked, then packed again. She'd written a letter to her art professor, explaining her departure, then torn it up. She'd stood in front of the mirror, practicing how to tell Damien she couldn't come, then rehearsing how to say goodbye to June at 10:30 p.m. 30 minutes before the train was scheduled to depart, Celeste was still sitting on her bed, paralyzed. By the magnitude of the choice, before her it was June who finally broke the stalemate. "Celeste," she said, holding out Celeste's jacket. "You're an artist. Artists don't play it safe. They leap, and they trust that their wings will carry them." Celeste looked at her friend, her first real friend at Ravencrest, the person who had supported her through homesickness and imposter syndrome, and countless late-night study sessions. "What if I fall?" "Then you paint the fall," June said with a grin. "And you make it beautiful." With that, Celeste grabbed her bags and ran. The train station was crowded, despite the late hour, full of travelers heading to various destinations. Celeste's heart pounded as she navigated through the crowds, searching for Platform 7. Her bags felt impossibly heavy, and doubt crept in with every step. What was she doing? This was insane. She was throwing away years of hard work for a boy she'd known for a month. Her professors would be disappointed. Her parents would be confused. She was being reckless and irresponsible. And Celeste? She looked up to see Damien standing beside the train, his own bags at his feet, and an expression of such hope and relief on his face that it took her breath away. He was wearing a simple sweater and jeans instead of his usual perfect uniform, and somehow he looked more like himself than she'd ever seen him. "You came," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "I'm terrified," she admitted, stopping a few feet away from him. "So am I," he replied. "But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you." The train whistle blew, and passengers began boarding around them. Celeste felt the weight of the moment, the absolute finality of stepping onto that train. Once she crossed this threshold, there would be no going back to the safety of her carefully planned life. What if we're making a mistake? She asked. Damien moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Ben will make new mistakes, better mistakes. We'll fail spectacularly and learn magnificently. We'll write our own story, even if we don't know how it ends." Celeste looked into his green eyes and saw her own fear reflected there, but also something else: courage, hope, and a love deep enough to build a future on. She thought about her painting in the tower, the girl with hollow eyes staring out from shadows. That girl had been waiting for someone to choose her. But this girl, standing here with paint still under her fingernails and stars in her future, was ready to choose herself. All aboard. The conductor called. Celeste picked up her bags and stepped toward the train. "Okay," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Let's go write our story." As the train pulled away from the station, Celeste pressed her face to the window and watched Ravencrest Academy disappear into the distance. Beside her, Damien's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining like brushstrokes on a canvas. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Celeste thought about June's parting words, about the vast world of possibilities spreading before them, about the courage it took to paint outside the lines of other people's expectations. "No regrets," she said, and meant it. Outside the window, the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks against the darkness, and Celeste began mentally composing her first painting of their new life, 2 figures leaping into the unknown, trusting that their wings would carry them toward something beautiful.